competence, productivity, and efficiency. Topic apps. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the attendees to EC Council University presents Cyber Talks. This is Yasin, and I will be your host for this evening. And I welcome all the attendees who are attending this webinar event from across the world. I also like to welcome our speaker for today's evening, Mr. Ala Behrani. Hey Ala, how are you doing? Hello? Hello, Ala, are you there? All right, I seem that there's some network issues going on. I think so. So he will join us. Yes. So I will just continue about telling about Ala Behrani. So here you go. So a big information about Ala Behrani here. Ala Behrani is a regional cybersecurity leader at GE with 14 years of experience in the information technology industry. Over the years, he has expertise across the entire software development lifecycle, gained in-depth exposure across information security, infrastructure, project management, networks, and network security. He has been recognized as an accomplished information security professional, having extensive experience with web application security, network security, database security, and using secure programming methodologies to clear out vulnerabilities in development phase. He is a recognized trainer and enabler, having successfully designed and driven programs to augment performance, competence, productivity, and efficiency. Topic abstract. With security being vital factor to determine continuous success of every organization, and looking at how company breaches are getting more difficult to detect and stop due to hackers formulating new sophisticated techniques, it is keen to fight back with the appropriate tools, techniques, and methodologies. In this session, we will be talking about how to defend against hackers and protect organizations in the best cost-effective way. We will talk about how ethical hacking serves as a mean to protect, how to think and act like a hacker in order to stop hackers. And most interestingly, is how a penetration tester can profit the company or lead to its loss. So without any further delay, I give the floor to Ala Behrani. Yes, sir, please start with the presentation.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Ala Behrani. I am a cybersecurity leader at GE, and I'm here to talk to you today about how not to be a penetration tester. Now, it's quite interesting because we're taking this from a little bit different of an approach. So let's just dive in directly into the agenda for today. So in the couple of minutes to come, I'll talk about what is the need behind having a penetration tester in the first place. What are they? What do they do exactly? What's the comparison between them and vulnerability assessment? We'll see this also used interchangeably in this domain, so we'll just talk briefly about that as well. And then we'll move on to the methodology that the penetration tester uses out. We'll talk a bit more about penetration testing hats. I'm sure you'll find that also interesting. And then we'll end our session with some time for your questions, and hopefully we'll have a good interactivity with you guys. So on with the slides, and the first thing is the need behind having a penetration tester. Why would I need, as an organization, to hire a penetration tester? Now, this is quite interesting also, because if you look at the number of emerging technologies coming out in the world these days, almost on daily basis, on weekly basis, on monthly basis, there's a new solution coming out, there's a new technology coming out, and organizations and companies are adapting those new technologies. This creates a quite complex environment compared to 10 years ago, compared to 20 years ago. Protecting those environments is a challenge by itself, and in order to do so, I need more than just a single security solution. These days, I have so many of them that I cannot rely on just one, or I cannot even handle having multiple solutions for multiple technologies. So a penetration tester will help me a bit by identifying where my weaknesses are, by finding my flaws and my mixed environment, and then by guiding me exactly towards how should I prioritize my security shortcomings. These days, I have a lot of tools that can offer penetration testing for me, and that's one thing that I'll dive into later on throughout the slide, and talk more about how a penetration tester is a bit different than just using tools. Now, the definition, or the actual definition of a penetration tester, I've got this from Techopedia, by the way. It says that a penetration tester, or a penetration testing, is a method of testing, measuring, and enhancing the established security measures on information security and support areas. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it simply means that I'm trying to figure out how good are my security controls in my organization. When I have these security measures implemented, when I have these countermeasures implemented, are they really effective? Are they doing the job that they're supposed to do? How good are they good at their job? Are they replaceable by a better solution? Do they interfere with the business operation? Is there something that I can do in order to lower down my cost and increase my benefit? All of these questions could be answered by a penetration tester after performing his job throughout your organization. And we'll see this also as we move along. Now, one thing that you always hear when you talk about penetration testing is vulnerability assessment. And a lot of people, they mix up between the two terminologies. So let's take a couple of minutes just to realize or understand exactly what's the difference between them. If I may, I would say that a vulnerability assessment is part of a penetration test. That's one way of scoping it down. But then at the end of the day, a vulnerability assessment requires that you use predefined tools, and most of the time it will be automated as a process, in opposite or in contrary to a penetration testing. Now, penetration testing, yes, it uses certain tools, but it has a lot of manual work involved into it. The penetration tester would need to use those tools and sometimes craft his own tools in order to perform the needed tests in that mixed environment, or in that company, or in that organization. You would not find a single tool or one tool that can carry out all the scope of your penetration testing throughout the organization from A to Z. If you want, you have to use a multitude of tools. And how would you choose them? How would you decide what is right to use here and what is beneficial to use there? A penetration tester can do that. Now, one major difference also between a penetration tester and a vulnerability assessment is the outcome of that exercise. A vulnerability assessment produces a vulnerability assessment report, which basically indicates where your vulnerabilities are to this piece of technology or to this device or to a certain aspect of your network or organization. While a penetration testing report, as we will see also in the coming slides, issues much more than that. In a penetration testing report, I will showcase the methodology that I followed. I will showcase the scope in which I performed that penetration testing. I will even list down the tools that I used, the methods in which they were manually also incorporated into that penetration test, and most importantly, the results and the findings of my testing. Now, the findings will be something readable by the management. So the language used will be understandable by management. And at the same time, it will have technical parts in which even the technical folks from IT or information security can also relate to the findings and react based on that. So a penetration testing report is much more detailed. It's much more information wealthy. It will help the organization to set a plan in order to move ahead and secure their environment. So this is just some of the things I wanted to highlight as differences between a penetration test and a vulnerability assessment. You'll often hear those terminologies, both of them use intervened. So just not to get confused. Now, moving on, I want to list down the methodology that we would like to follow in penetration testing. Now, before I go through that, you need to keep in mind that there are different methodologies to be followed here. Now, why are there different methodologies? Well, just like in software development, there are different development frameworks, each suiting a certain scenario. In penetration testing, is the same thing. And our methodology, or the one that I'll be referencing here, is the EC Council methodology, and I've seen it in practice in so many scenarios. It works. It has good results also. And even if it differs from the other penetration testing methodologies out there, the difference is not that much, and it won't make that big of a result. So let's dive in and see the steps that I have here, or the parts of my methodology. The first one is information gathering, and this is you can consider this as your homework before you try to test anything, or before you try to attack anything in your testing. You need to gather more information about this, and I'll talk more about each and every part of this methodology in the coming slides. The second phase is the scanning phase, and scanning has a technical understanding behind it, and we'll see that also in the coming slides. The third step is gaining access towards the system that I'm trying to pen test. The fourth step is maintaining access. Now, in maintaining access, you might think about it as a temporary phase, or you think about it as a temporary state, but we'll see it's much more longer than that in the coming slides. And the last phase is clearing my tracks, and we'll see what that means exactly in a couple of minutes. So let's move on throughout this methodology, and I'll start off again with information gathering. Now, one interesting thing about penetration testing, in order for it to become successful, is that you need to start acting like a hacker. You need to start acting as if you were attacking that organization. So the methodology that you will follow, the processes that you will follow, are similar to what a hacker would wants to follow in order to attack this organization. So the first thing that guy would do is gather information about his target or her target, and try to find places, or we call them attack vectors. We'll see them also later on. We'll try to find attack vectors in order to penetrate that organization or that company itself. Now, in the scope of penetration testing, because I cannot do a penetration test for the entire organization easily, I would most of the time scope it down to a certain system or a certain channel or a certain part of the organization. So let's say, for example, I'm trying to pen test the server farm or the data center that I have in my organization. So I'll start off by gathering information about that data center, where it is in terms of physical location, what are the accesses towards that room or facility. I will gather information about the company itself. What is the history of that company? Did it actually merge with another company? Was it acquired, for example? Who's the employees that are working in that company? And this is something that you might think about. Why would I care about the employees working in it? Well, in order to gain access to it, maybe I need the credentials of one of those employees, and knowing those employees will actually help me in doing so. So anyways, all of that information will be gathered, and most of the time it will be gathered from public places. Now, information gathering, and sometimes it's called reconnaissance, is either active or passive. Now, what I mean by passive information gathering is that I'm not interacting with the actual company or target in any means. I will be using public sources like the internet, for example, or like newspapers or news articles or journals or whatever that talk about this organization. Or I'll sometimes use a technique called dumpster diving, and this is what you see as an image on the right side of this slide. And I'm sure you've seen this in a couple of movies, probably before on TV. Dumpster diving is not what the picture is showing. I will not actually go diving into a dumpster, but I will actually head towards the waste of that company and see what valuable information I can get out from what they have discarded in terms of paper information or papered information and so on. So reconnaissance could be either passive, in which I don't interact with the target, or it could be active, in which I do interact with them. And then that interaction also comes in levels. It could be as simple as calling the reception or the hotline of that company and trying to get some information about it. It could be even talking to the employees in a public place and just socializing with them or interacting with them. So this is what I'm trying to do in information gathering, getting as much information as I can about that organization in order to figure out exactly how am I going to attack it, how am I supposed to attack it. Some of the things that I might gather is the Wi-Fi information. If that organization has Wi-Fi access points within the facility itself, if I go driving around that facility or walking around that facility, will I be able to detect that Wi-Fi signal? Can I actually use it in order to connect to the organizational network and so on? So all of that information, I'll be gathering it, and that's my first step in my methodology and what to do if I wanted to penetrate test into an organization. The second thing I would do is scanning. Now, with that wealth of information that I have, I supposedly gained, or I supposedly decided to use a certain access towards this network. Let's say, for example, the Wi-Fi access that I mentioned earlier, or it could be even a possible network point in some location where I infiltrate the organization and so on. Anyways, as my second step now, I'll start scanning through the network itself, scanning through the organization, trying to find out what exactly do they have in that organization, what types of machines do they have, what operating systems do they run. I will try to find what type of servers, for example, switches, printers, any live nodes or any nodes that I have on my network that will help me in order to gain even more access towards that organization. So this could be done with a wealth of tools. Nmap being the most famous one of them, and I'm sure you've already heard about this tool. It's one of the let's say de facto standard tools that are used these days when it comes to network scanning, and not only hackers use it, administrators actually use it as well. Programmers or developers, they use it as well. A lot of security tools have Nmap as a scanning engine within them because the tool is legitimately a good tool to use throughout that. So the aim here is to find the machines that I can attack, find servers, find services by scanning through the open ports and so on. And then I will map out my attack vector. I will map out exactly where I'm supposed to hit next and where am I supposed to break in order to move on to the next phase of my methodology, which is the gaining access phase. Now, in this phase, after choosing a certain target, I would try to break into that target itself, whether it's a login for a web application, whether it was a username and password required for a certain system, or a machine, or a Linux box, or whatever it is. I will try to gain access to that. Now, gaining access most of the time will have you dealing with passwords or hashes related to passwords in terms of authentication, or sometimes even certificates, depending on your information that you gathered and depending on your scanning that you've done earlier. But breaking the password or cracking the password has its own several techniques that you will go in details with if you go for any ethical hacking program. But some of those techniques would be as simple as stealing that password from somewhere. You'll see this also. I don't know if you've actually experienced this or not, but a lot of guys at work, they will write their passwords and they will have them on sticky notes stuck on the monitor of their desk just to remind them of those passwords. So if I have an infiltrator to the organization walking around, for example, looking at those passwords written, that's one way of getting those passwords. Another approach would be guessing the password, and guessing the password here will depend on our previous approach earlier, in which we gathered information about the employees. A lot of us, they like to choose passwords based on their date of birth, for example, based on their spouse's name, based on their children, on their pets, on things that relate to their life. So guessing the password could also be an approach that attackers use. Now, brute forcing and dictionary attacks, these are more of a technical type of password cracking techniques. Brute forcing, this is when I exhaust all the possibilities for a certain password. It's the lengthiest approach, or the lengthiest technique. And this is one way of representing how strong a password is. If you've noticed, when we're talking about password complexity, they always mention that this many characters with that much of variation will take this many years in order to break. And what they mean here by this many years is trying to brute force that password by trying every possible combination in order to do so. Now, a dictionary attack, and sometimes there would be a hybrid dictionary attack as well. This is where they use common words from dictionaries or certain lists in order to break a certain password. And that's why the best practice is always not to choose a plain word as your password, because of this approach here. And one thing also to keep in mind is that the attackers, even if they manage to gain access to a certain system, the privilege that they get from that user account or the account that they're using might not be an admin privileged account, or it might not be a high privileged account. So one of the things that attackers would do in this scenario is that they will escalate those privileges using several techniques, either by creating admin accounts, or by exploiting admin accounts, or by exploiting vulnerabilities into those systems that can escalate their privileges as well. All of that can also be seen in the next phase, which is maintaining access. Now, what I mean by maintaining access is not only the ability to stay as long as possible onto that system, but also the ability to exit now and then reconnect again back to that system. That's what I mean by maintaining access. Maintaining access means that the vulnerability that I used in order to gain access to that system, whether it was a flaw in a certain operating system, or if it was a bug in an application, or if it was stolen credentials, for example, or a weak password, or whatever it is, I want to make sure that all of those factors are still there, and that I can reconnect again to that system in order to access it and use it, or even abuse it, or whatever, whatever. And that's what I mean by maintaining access. Now, this could be approached in several ways. It could be accomplished by using several techniques. One would be by implanting rootkits into that system, by implanting Trojans, which open up backdoors for me to access. It could be gaining access to the system today because of a certain exploit or vulnerability, but then embedding a rootkit somewhere else in order to give me direct access for next time. So that's also another approach that attackers would use. Now, why would they do that? Why would I, as an attacker, connect to a system today, let's say gather some, steal some information, sabotage something, delete something, walk out, and why would I come back again? Why would I need to come back again? Well, these days we have a lot of zombie attacks or distributed denial of service attacks, and all of these, they require zombie machines in order to do that. Now, what I mean by a zombie machine is that exactly this. It's a machine that I can gain access to whenever I need, and then I can perform whatever I need on that machine. So imagine I would infect 100 machines based on this approach, and I'll just keep them idle, waiting for a certain day or an event in which I need to launch an attack on another victim. I would then connect to those 100 machines and launch my attack. What happens also in organized crime is that me as an attacker, I would actually sell those zombie machines. There are control and command centers these days that allows me to do exactly that. Based on certain configurations implanted into those victim machines, once they boot up, they will connect to a certain command and control center. And then whenever the attacker wishes, he can launch an attack or perform whatever activity he needs on those machines. I mean, attacks not necessarily means that I will try to harm a certain victim. It could be even what we see these days in terms of data mining or cryptocurrency mining and so on. So the possibilities are endless in this scenario. One of the keywords that you might be interested in when it comes to hiding information into these zombie machines is NTFS streams. And NTFS streams are basically just hidden data streams embedded within the NTFS file system that allows attackers to hide data into them. Now, this is something by design. This is something that Microsoft created for their own use of metadata and property data storing. But attackers also use that in order to hide their malicious data, let's say, and their rootkits or Trojans or whatever they are, and execute them later on. And nobody would know where exactly or to which data stream they are attached, except for the attacker or hacker. There are ways to countermeasure this, of course, like using FAT systems or FAT32 systems, but that's another topic that we can talk about hopefully in future sessions. So I managed to gain access to the system. I managed to maintain my access to make sure that I come back again. So the last thing I would need to do is to clear my tracks. Now, nobody wants to get caught. These hackers, they intend to stay anonymous. They intend to hide their activity. So that's the reason why we have clearing our tracks as one of the methodology steps. Now, I understand that we have some suicidal hackers, they call them, where it doesn't matter to them if they get caught or not, but that's a different approach. Let's talk about the norm here, where an attacker or a hacker would like to stay anonymous and not get caught. So the concept behind this phase is to hide the identity of the attacker, and this could be accomplished in several ways. It could be by manipulating the system logs of whatever devices that logged his activity. It could be even deleting logs, or it could be even by raising false positives as one of those techniques. The attacker would raise so much false logs that the administrators will actually miss out on the actual logs that indicate where the hacker came from or what did he do exactly. So there are different approaches here for this phase or for this step. And one of the things that we lack as in administrators is the review of logs in organizations. Until today, we have a lot of organizations that don't care about their logging, and they don't actually maintain any logs or centralized logging in their organization. So for hackers or for attackers, that's considered to be heaven for them, because it will be really difficult for an administrator to actually trace back the logs in an attempt after an incident or something similar to that. Now it says here, on average, attackers remain in your network for 100 days before detection. And this is actually true. I've seen this number go up to 200 days before being detected. So an attacker would be in your organization for more than 6 months, playing around in your systems back and forth, and you wouldn't be able to detect him due to numerous reasons. One being very low on your security posture, and second of all, because you don't know where to look and why you should be considerate about a certain attacker or a certain incident. So it's always important to stay proactive and not reactive to security incidents. And that's a reason. That's one of the things that you need to keep in mind when you're trying to fight against hackers. So we have hats to categorize these hackers, or actually it's more or less hats to categorize ethical hackers, to correct it. We have black hats, we have white hats. So black hats are basically our hackers. They have enormous or extraordinary skill when it comes to computer techniques. They know exactly how a system works. They know how to hack it. They know how to move around it. They know how to access it. So these are the black hats. These are the bad guys. Now, on the opposite, we have white hats, who are ethical hackers to be considered. They have the same skill, they have the same knowledge, they have the same technique, but they use that knowledge and technique in order to defend against hackers. So they would perform the same test, they would perform the same activity as hackers would, but they wouldn't reach the point where they actually sabotage the system or cause any harm to the system. Instead, they would report back and they would say that I found this and this in terms of a vulnerability and an exploit. And in order to countermeasure it, you need to do steps 1, 2, and 3. Those guys are my white hats, and these guys are what companies need to employ under them, and what companies need to use when it comes to penetration testing. Now, as you might have guessed, we have also something called gray hats. Now, gray hats are people, by the name of it, are the actual guys with the same technical skill that we've mentioned a minute ago, but sometimes they act as bad guys and sometimes they act as good guys. So that's where the terminology came in, where they're gray hats, and that's like something that you might see in movies as well, where you have a good guy, which is a white hat, where he is forced or blackmailed into doing something on the opposite of the spectrum, which is being a black hat here. So that's where the definition comes in with gray hats as well. So the main topic of the webinar today is how not to be a penetration tester. And what I mean by this is that what is the best approach to being a penetration tester, and what are the things that you shouldn't do as a penetration tester. So to summarize things a bit, or to clear out things a bit more into it, in order to be a successful or a good penetration tester, first of all, you need to scope down exactly what you're trying to test in your environment. It's not that you would come in and you would say that you will test everything and you will scope the entire organization under your penetration test. That will not work. Now, the second thing that you need to keep in mind here is the tools and the techniques that you would use, the methodology basically that we explained a couple of minutes ago. A penetration tester will not just get a bunch of tools and just run them in the environment blindly without knowing exactly what that tool is doing and why is he running it. Because at the end of the day, you will not find a single tool or a multiple of tools that will be sufficient for every environment. Manual testing will be involved as a penetration tester. And if you don't do that manual part of things, then you cannot be considered to be a penetration tester also fully. So again, use the tools and involve your manual skills into it in order to really perform the tests of those systems. The third thing that you need to keep in mind is the report or the documentation of your exercise and approach and findings. And this is the coming topic, or this is the coming slide that we'll see now in our topic. In order to actually be a good penetration tester, one important aspect of your exercise is the report that you will supply after performing your penetration test. Now, like I've mentioned earlier, the report is targeted towards senior management and towards technical staff. Your management should be able to read the executive summary of that report and understand to a certain extent what was wrong in their organization and how to fix it. That is a very crucial and important part of the report, involving the management into an understandable level so you can get their buy-in into fixing whatever you need to fix in your security posture. The second part of it is the technical folks, or from IT or from the security department. They need to have enough information to understand exactly where the vulnerability is, what is causing it, and how to fix it. So all of those details need to be there in that report. As a penetration tester, you should be able to provide your recommendation towards how to rectify any of the issues that an organization faces. Now, some of the sections that you would include in your report, I've mentioned a couple of them here in this slide. This is not a fixed template. Some other reports include other sections as well. Some of them, they omit some of these sections, but it's good to look at some of the let's say known sections in this sense. So one important part of your report would be the executive summary, in which you would provide enough briefing for management to understand about your exercise and finding. The scope of work, it's very important to highlight this in your report. The objectives of your projects, why are you performing this penetration test? That's very important. Some people, they neglect this, because sometimes I would run a penetration test based on compliance requirements, a certain certification or certain authoritative body or a government is forcing me to run a penetration test to submit as evidence to a certain exercise. So all of these are different objectives, and I need to be clear about mine whenever I'm running my penetration test. The timeline of the penetration test is equally important, or this is something that we didn't discuss throughout the slides because this is part of the reporting. It's very important to mention the time in which the penetration test was performed because that will serve as part of the evidence in terms of submission and so on. When you find a certain vulnerability or exploit today, that might not be available tomorrow because of certain patching or because of certain system changes and so on. So you need to be clear about the timeline of your reporting and exercising. The summary of findings speaks for itself. The recommendations, as an expert in security, you need to provide your recommendations for the problems that they were found, the methodology that you followed throughout your exercise, and then the last section I kept here is the technical findings. These could be code listings or certain attachments or screenshots of more detailed technical information for your findings. It could be even partial logs of servers and so on. This again depends on the scenario and the test that you carried out. So all of this information that I've briefed you about through this webinar is available by EC Council through their master classes program. Now the EC Council master classes, they are aimed towards security professionals in the information security domain. It's provided by certified EC Council instructors, certified EC Council trainers. They provide a wealth hands-on experience towards security throughout their classes or throughout their topics. Now, the masterclass series in Doha, is like the one that you're sitting in, they are focused on certain courses throughout these master classes. These courses could include cyber defense or ethical hacking or penetration testing, forensics, or even security management throughout them. And they run these master classes throughout several cities in the region. It's not only Doha. For example, they have another master class in Manama as well. And the topics or the courses mentioned in those master classes might be different depending on the need or depending on the audience's requirement also in those cities. Now, one of the courses that they outline in these master classes is the Certified Ethical Hacker course. Now, CEH is a flagship when it comes to ethical hacking. It serves as a baseline of all ethical hacking programs throughout the world. It's one of the courses that are approved by Department of Defense in the States. Now, in version 10, what's new in version 10 for CH is that they included interesting topics like IoT hacking, for example. So that's something that I personally loved when I saw it introduced into version 10. The CISO program, or the Certified Chief Information Security Officer program offered by EC Council is a unique program that is not offered by other authoring bodies. That program gives the ability for information security professionals all over the world to be certified and on a CISO level. So this program, again, is one of a kind. It's not available in any other authoring bodies, let's say. So make sure to enjoy your class and this master class, and I would hope to see you in future webinars as well, and future master classes if time permits. And I will have your questions now. So thank you very much for listening, guys.
Thank you, Ala. Thank you very much for the amazing presentation here. So before we move on to the Q&A session, let me introduce the audience to Mr. Basant Das, who is a regional leader and with a special note in regards masterclass. Now I hand over the mic to Mr. Basandas.
Thank you very much for that. Good afternoon, everyone. First things first, on behalf of the entire EC Council family, I'd like to thank Mr. Behrani for taking time out from his busy schedule and sharing his insights on such an important subject. Now, having said that, we'd also like to take this opportunity to reiterate, as Mr. Behrani has very categorically mentioned, that we are going to be conducting two masterclass sessions, one in Doha and the other in Bahrain. Now, the one in Bahrain is scheduled between the 21st to the 24th of this month. This will be at the Crown Plaza Hotel. Now, the sessions that we are going to be conducting there are CCSO CEH, which is the Certified Chief Information Security Officer, the Certified Ethical Master Session, and also the ECSA, which is the Penetration Testing Certification provided by EC Council. Unfortunately, the ECSA session has been completely booked out. So we are still accepting registrations for the Certified CISO and the Certified Ethical Hacking session. I'm also happy to inform you that the trainer for our CCSO session in Bahrain is Mr. Joe Mohe. He's actually one of the key members of the CCSO advisory board, and we're going to be flying him down from Oregon in the United States to conduct the session. You can all see my contact information on the screen, and please do reach out if there is any sort of an interest in attending and taking up the last few positions that are available for the masterclass in Manama and in Doha as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Basant. I hope the audience has taken a note of the website, that is masterclass.ecouncil.org. You can always go over there and check the class detail page for Doha and Bahrain as well. As Basant mentioned, we have all the classes listed over there. We have slots available, and it goes without saying that these master classes will have the top of the top instructors from across the globe who will fly down to these particular cities, and they will deliver the classes. So I'll pass it on again to Yasin, who can do the introduction to Mr. Bahani again, and who can take questions now. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Coming back to you, Ala. Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Ala. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Great. So let's start with the Q&A session now. I hope you're ready with the So the first question says, as we know that there are different processes of penetration testing, like internal testing, blind testing, double blind testing. Which method or process is best for performing a penetration test?
Well, each type of penetration test is suitable for a certain scenario. When you're talking about internal testing versus external testing, first of all, what is the requirement out of that penetration test? Sometimes the compliance would force you to have an external test. That means it should be, the testing should be from outside the organization. Now, is this test also run by the organization itself, or is there a third party that performs the penetration test? That's also another aspect to it. But then again, I will come back to the basic ask of why am I doing that penetration test to decide, first of all, would I need to be doing it from internally, from inside the organization, or would I want to do it from outside? That's the first step. The second is the blind penetration testing, and sometimes they call it the white box pen testing and the black box pen testing. Now, again, given on the scenario, I might require a penetration test to be carried out with some information given upon hand for the penetration tester. Like, for example, when we mentioned the information gathering phase, or when we mentioned the scanning phase for my methodologies, I would be basically getting as much information as I can about my target that I want to test here. So sometimes organizations, they will ease out that phase by providing that information up ahead or ahead of time for the penetration tester. They would indicate that this server farm, for example, or this network segment, for example, or this is the details of the applications that we need you to test. These are the usernames and passwords. They would give out that information to the penetration tester, and then they would ask him to perform the test or to carry on the test from that point forward. That itself has its own benefits. It could be possible that I'll be testing for insider threats, where an employee already has the correct credentials to access a certain application. An employee already has the required machines in order to access the network and so on. He already has the privileges. But then what happens if that employee goes rogue, for example? Or what happens if that employee's machine gets compromised and somebody takes over that machine with all the credentials and privileges associated with it? So that's again, coming back to the basic question of why I need to perform that test. This is one of the scenarios. I want to see what happens if I get compromised from the inside. And the same thing goes for the black box testing. I want to see how secure my information is to the outside world, so I wouldn't provide anything to the penetration tester in terms of insider information. I would just tell him, I need you to approach this exercise as if you were a hacker who doesn't know much about the organization and he needs to work his way through. So these are all different types of penetration testing depending on the scenario and the requirement and the ask by the company itself. So that's a very good question.
Thank you, Ala. This is Rohit again here. I see a mix of questions coming in both in this chat box, and some people are writing directly to me on the email. So in the interest of time, I'll be reading both across. The one question that somebody asked is if you can speak a little bit about the difference between penetration testing and vulnerability assessment.
Sure. Vulnerability assessment, like I mentioned earlier, depends mostly on using predefined tools in order to get a vulnerability assessment report. Now, a vulnerability assessment report could be something as simple as this certain machine, which is running an operating system such as Windows or Windows Server or whatnot, has the following patches or following security patches missing. So that's a vulnerability assessment report. It shows you what do you need to do in order to get back your security posture for those nodes and for those machines. Sometimes the vulnerability assessment reports showcases some of the unnecessary open ports or unnecessary running services in your organization. So they would come and tell you, like, you have Telnet running throughout your environment. Now, Telnet is known to be a plain text command protocol where it shouldn't be used in an enterprise level. SSH should be replacing it. So if that scanning tool or that vulnerability assessment tool detects Telnet, for example, on your network, it will report it saying that you shouldn't have it, and that's the way you should fix it. But the vulnerability assessment tools also, it's not a one tool that fits everything. You need a tool to perform your vulnerability assessment for your network nodes. You need a tool to perform a vulnerability assessment for your web applications. You need another tool to perform a vulnerability assessment on your patches or your updates that you require. And again, some scenarios, a vulnerability assessment report would be sufficient. Some compliance cases would require a vulnerability assessment report, and they would just be happy with that. So that's a very good way also to approach this. But a penetration testing is a much more broader exercise. A penetration test might involve a vulnerability assessment as one of the exercises or one of the things that are carried out. But the penetration test involves much more activity or interactivity with the target. A penetration test is simply putting on your hacking caps and trying to infiltrate that system or that network or that organization or that application in any means possible. And this could be done from the inside, it could be done from the outside, it could involve using ready-made tools, or it could involve writing up your own scripts and tools. It depends also on the environment. Most of the time, the penetration testing will require a much more manual approach towards it, and this is why the definition of a black hat or a white hat is a guy with exceptionally good computer skills. He needs to know the ins and outs of how things operate within the network or within the organization or in IT in general. Once he knows how these things are working, then he would know how to hack them, or basically how to modify the behavior of that application or that network machine or that device in order to bypass a certain login, in order to modify some data, in order to retrieve some information, or even sometimes even disrupt operation also. So penetration testing, just to recap, a penetration test is a much broader exercise. It involves much more manual work into it, and the outcome, the penetration testing report, is a much more detailed report of findings, and recommendations are much more laid out there clearly for the people to fix in the organization. A vulnerability assessment report, if you show it to management, maybe they'll understand it to some extent if you have some graphical charts or diagrams to showcase or to summarize your results, but it wouldn't be that beneficial to them. But on the other hand, the penetration testing report can be understood by management. It can be used even to set strategy or operation planning for the IT department or the information security department in the organization.
Well, I must say that was a very, very well-defined and very patient answer, Ala. Thank you very much for that. I have a few more very interesting questions, but I think the most common question that I'm getting right now is about the Masterclass Dubai. Ala, give me 1 second. I will ask Basanta to answer this question, and then I can shift back to you. I am quite aware that we are in the last minute of the webinar, and we have to close sharp in next 5 minutes. So, Basant, I've received this question from at least 3 people. When is Masterclass going to come to Dubai?
All right. Well, we are actually conducting a Masterclass session between the 21st and the 24th of July in Dubai. I would actually request everyone to visit the Masterclass website. The EC Council Masterclass website early next week is going to be updated with the third quarter schedule of our Masterclass sessions. And one of these sessions is in Dubai. For people living in UAE, you actually have the advantage of choosing between 2 locations. One is Dubai and the other is Abu Dhabi. So depending on your convenience, you can choose to attend any of the Masterclass sessions at either of these locations.
Yeah, thank you, Basant. And needless to say, even the candidates from other countries, and I keep hearing that request, let's say India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, who want to fly down to these countries, we have these packages available where we include the flight ticket, visa, including the stay and all of that. Even people from other countries can also request for more information. We can figure out whether we have friendly visa norms and whether we can arrange a package for you. Thank you, Basant.
Thanks so much, Rohit.
Okay. In the interest of time, Ala, I'll read out the last question because I think that's more on a defensive mechanism or the preventive approach. Somebody asked that what are the popular ways to avoid brute force attack or brute force hacks which are prevailing nowadays?
Well, brute forcing is a technique where you depend on exhaustion of possibilities. So the attacker would sit out and try every possible combination to do so, to gain access. One countermeasure to that is to set an account lockout, or sometimes you would see it in websites as the number of retries allowed before the account is locked out. So you're allowed to type in the wrong password for 3 times, for example, and then that's it. You're either requested to verify your account again, or sometimes you will get some sort of challenge on the website, or such, or a captcha, as they say, in order to try to log in again. And if things go even further to that, the account will be locked out, and it will require an administrator to unlock that account after certain investigation. So the basic technique here is to have an account lockout policy, or a number of retries policy, in which you indicate how many times the user is allowed to try his password in a wrong fashion. Otherwise, the strength of a password depends on the complexity of it, and I know there's a lot of debate about this, but overall, choosing a good complex password will also help you defend against either brute forcing or even dictionary attacks. I'm quite happy with the number of questions, and I don't mind also connecting with you guys on another session also, if you feel that people are interested in the topic. I'll be happy to answer also more questions.
Thank you, Ala. Thank you very much. It was an honor having you with us. So before we end the session, is there anything you would like to tell the audience again?
Penetration testing, again, if you want to implement, or if you want to perform the exercise in your organization, it's very important to understand why you're doing this, the objective behind the penetration test. It's a good exercise to have in your organization on an annual basis, or even in a bi-quarterly basis, depending on the requirement and all. But without defining your objective, without defining the scope of that penetration test, it will be a much less beneficial exercise in your organization. So keep that in mind, and of course always go for certification, whether with the necessary skills of being a penetration tester, by approaching EC Council, or even by hiring somebody who is certified to provide that service for you. Thank you very much for the opportunity from EC Council University to present this webinar. I thank everybody for attending and listening throughout the session. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much, Ala. It was an honor having you with us. Thank you, audience. Thank you very much. And before we end the session, let me just tell you all that the next Cyber Talk is by Mr. Richard Steinen, the author and industry analyst, on topic countering targeted attacks, AET defense, on 4th April at 11 a.m. EST, 8:30 IST, 4 p.m. GMT, which is today itself. Thank you all. Thank you very much. It was great having you all here.